Hi, this is Thomas Graves, and welcome to the Black Mold of Grief. This is episode 6, and I'm going to talk about the loss of my dog, Leo. I want to introduce Leo, who was my chocolate lab that helped me heal tremendously. In 2010, I realized I needed to really start digging into the black mold, and I knew I didn't need to be alone, but I knew I didn't need to be with people. So I decided to get a dog. And when the rescue people reached out to me, they said, we have a chocolate lab, 1 year old, and you can pick him up tomorrow. So I thought about, what do I want him to do for me? What do I want his purpose to be in my life? And what do I want his name to be? And I thought about calling him Miller because I had a professor in college named Dr. Miller who wrote a note on my first paper that said, I don't care what you do with your life, I want you to write. And then I thought, no, because I'm not writing. And when I call him Miller, that's going to be the past. And the purpose of a dog is to keep me in the moment and to teach me how to live in the moment and not live in the past or worry about the future. So I was like, I don't know what his name's going to be, but it's not Miller. So I meet the lady in the Shoney's parking lot, and she opens the back of her SUV, and there's Leo, just full of life and wiggling. And I said, does he have a name? And she said, no, but right now we're just calling him Miller. And I looked at her and I didn't say anything, but I was like, why? And she said, well, we've adopted so many animals, we have run out of names. So when we pick one up, we just look at a street sign or billboard or whatever, and that's the name. And when we picked him up, we stopped to get gas, and we're pumping the gas. This Miller beer truck pulls up, and so he's Miller. And I was like, okay, but that's not your name, but you're definitely the right dog. So I took him home, and I'm playing with him, and he's just full of life. And I got an idea. So I went to Google Translate and I typed in the word today because I wanted his name to mean today, so that when I called him, it would be a reminder to me to just take care of today. And as I scrolled through all the languages, Leo is today in Swahili. And I felt like that was a great, strong name for a dog. And it just reminded me to take care of today. And that is what he did for me. He really taught me to live in the moment. He would wake me up every morning and just jump on the bed and hover over me and just wiggle and wag. And we would go hiking. And that's where I did a lot of my healing, out on the trail, just thinking and processing. And that's where I came up with the different things like the black mold and the flood and, all of those different terminologies was on the trail with Leo. And he would also know when to just literally jump up. I have a Chase lounge, and I would sit on the lounge, and he would jump up. And he was a big dog. He was 90 pounds. He wasn't fat. He was just big, but he would literally sit here and then just lay across my chest and put his head up here on my shoulder. And he would just sit with me when, things are bad. And, but then at the same time in the morning, he was like, let's go. It's a new day. And that back and forth just really kept me going and kept me in the moment. And recently I was talking to a friend who is a therapist and telling them about joy in the album and how I wanted to bring joy. And he said that we do have a little bitty joy cup in our brain, and that when we're with someone who brings us joy, they can fill our joy cup in 6 seconds. And I realized that's what Leo did. I could come home from the day, just foul mood, everything wrong. And just the way he would greet me, in 6 seconds, he could fill up my joy cup and I was good. And so in March, late February, early March of 20, I came home and he had this thing on his jaw, and it was this really hard mass. And so I thought, well, maybe it's cancer. I don't know what it is. And so that was a Friday. And so I thought, well, I'll take him in on Monday. So Sunday night I came home and it had grown. On Friday, you could just feel it, but on Sunday night, you could see it. And so I thought it was terminal. So that night, I laid on the floor with him because I thought I was going to have to put him down the next morning. And I just slept with him and held him and thanked him for being a great dog and helping me heal. And the next morning, when I was taking him, he knew what the plan was because he would not come off the porch. He was not. I couldn't get him out the door. I couldn't get him off the porch, and I was dragging him. And then when I finally got him into the car and we went, he wouldn't get out of the car, and he was never afraid of the vet. He always jumped out, and he loved the vet techs, but he just wouldn't. He was kept hovering in the back, and finally I just looked at him and I was crying. I said, "Look, we won't do anything you're not ready for." And then he came to me. We went and looked, and the vet said it's an abscess. He cut his throat chewing something sharp, and it was just a blood clot, so it wasn't cancer. So he was in the hospital for a couple of weeks, and in the hospital he contracted MRSA. And so after a couple of weeks he got out and he was back home, and he'd always had some digestive issues randomly, nothing terrible, but every 6 months or so he would. So he started having issues. What I didn't know is his body was shutting down, but I just thought it was, another episode. So I didn't realize his body was shutting down. But because I had laid with him a couple of weeks before, I didn't want him to think I only was going to lay down with him when I was going to put him down. So I laid down with him on the floor again for about 30 minutes, and he just put his head on my hip, and I just petted him and talked to him again. And so then I ended up going to bed, and then I came down the next morning and he had passed. And so I just sat with him, and I called the vet, and they were about to close. It was a Saturday morning, but they said they'd wait until I got there with him. And so I called my neighbor. We wrapped him in a blanket and took him, and they had a clipboard waiting on me for his ashes. And they'd filled everything out already except for the inscription on the top of the box. And so I just wrote, couldn't say it, so she had to hand me the clipboard, and I just wrote, "Best good boy ever." And so one of the things I learned from him from a grief perspective is he would sleep around the couch, and when I was watching TV, if there was a doorbell on the TV, he would come racing around the couch, and he looked like a drunk man coming off of a merry-go-round because he was still half asleep and he was not balanced, and he would just be barking. And so I would just always say to him, "It's okay. It's the TV. It's okay, TV." And so for several months after he passed, when there was a doorbell on the TV, I would literally turn to say that to him, and he wouldn't come. And so that was, again, those floods that I talked about where you can't control them. They just hit. And because of him, I learned to just sit there and let them hit. And so I'm very grateful to him for that. And then I learned another form of grief, which is the day the doorbell rang on the TV and I didn't turn to see him. And then that was another flood of pain that I had moved on. And that was another period of time where I just would grieve each time I didn't turn for him. So I still think of him every day, and I explain him as the law of physics where a body at rest stays at rest until an equal or greater force acts upon it. And I was absolutely a body at rest when he came into my life. And he was the force that put me in motion. And I wouldn't be where I am with this podcast, with the album, without him being that force on me. And so I'm just grateful for him. San VB is the artist on this version, and we classify it as pop, but I jokingly call it the South Central Paris hip hop monastery version because it has a pipe organ, and we had a choir that the producer took, Taylor Franklin, and he chopped it up and made it really rhythmic. And it's essentially, we were trying to imitate what Pentatonix would have done if they were on the album. And so it has a really cool groove, and San just has this incredible vocal range. And so he was able to soar above it, and it's just a great, very unique sound that doesn't exist anywhere else. A lot of the other versions, we were kind of picking and choosing and imitating other things. This one's totally unique. And the other thing I want to highlight about San is his work ethic. And I was very fortunate with a lot of artists, most all the artists on the album, for the dedication they did. And I just want to highlight one thing that San did. He is trilingual. He speaks English, Spanish, and French. He's from Argentina. And he sent me the final vocal. And then a week later, he sent me another one with an email. And he said, don't use the one I sent you last week, use this one. And he went on to explain that he woke up one morning and was worried that his English accent or his Spanish accent might have influenced his French delivery. And so he sent his vocal to a friend in France and a friend in Belgium and had them critique his diction. And they made notes and sent it back. And so he recut the edits that he needed to. And he said, make sure you use this one because it's more correct. And when I got that, it was like, I never would have known that, but he cared enough to do that. And so I want to thank him for that. And again, that type of dedication played out over and over throughout the whole album with all the artists. They gave me things that I didn't even know to ask for. And that's why the album came out as well as it did.
Si je ne change pas, je te verrai là-haut et ne te parlerai que de mes plaies, de mes mots. Toi tu comprendrais, mais moi je serai honteux. Tu m'offrirais ton sourire et moi des larmes aux yeux. Lors de nos retrouvailles dans les cieux, je veux te rendre heureux. Je veux te rendre heureux. Je veux te rendre heureux. Ce ne sera pas facile, mais je vais vivre parce que je veux te rendre heureuse.
Thank you for tuning in to the Black Mold of Grief. Next week, we're going to have a shift in the podcast. I'm going to go into the more clinical side of the stages of grief, what they are, and how I can tell when I'm in which stage. But in the meantime, I hope something I've said helps you bring a little more joy to your first conversation in heaven. And I hope to see you next time.